Have you ever noticed that reality often feels like a loop, a resonance that echoes your own vibration back at you with uncanny precision? Moments of joy appear fleeting, moments of pain recur, and the world seems less like a linear path and more like a holographic projection, reflecting the frequency you carry. You think time moves forward, yet every experience you call new often carries the signature of what you once observed, what you once feared, what you once loved, and even what you once denied. In quantum terms, your consciousness is not merely a passenger on the timeline of events. It is the lens through which the universe crystallizes its probabilities into your lived experience. The observer is not outside reality. The observer is the gatekeeper of its unfolding. Consider the observer effect, the phenomenon where the act of observation shapes the very fabric of what is observed. In the quantum field, particles exist as infinite possibilities, waves of potential energy vibrating with countless outcomes. But the moment observation enters the equation, the infinite becomes singular. Choice collapses into reality. Your awareness is that observation. Every thought, every memory, every unhealed wound projects a pattern, a frequency, a resonance that the universe recognizes and mirrors back. Trauma, then, is not merely a shadow in your past. It is a persistent frequency that entangles with your present observation. When a wound remains unseen, it does not rest quietly in memory. It broadcasts. It pulses through the nervous system, rewiring perception, recalibrating attention, and quietly directing the gaze of consciousness toward the familiar, toward the patterns it has learned to recognize. A child who felt invisible does not stop noticing invisibility in adulthood. A betrayal once endured becomes a magnet for signs of treachery, no matter how subtle. Life is not punishing you. Life is reflecting the energetic imprint of observation itself. The quantum mirror does not lie. It simply resonates. Imagine the vast quantum field as a sea of shimmering waves, infinite, multidimensional, and coexisting. Each wave represents a potential reality. Each frequency a variant of experience. Some waves hum with love, some with fear, some with abundance, some with lack. The one you experience most consistently is the one your consciousness resonates with. It is not chance that brings pain, repetition, or heartbreak. It is frequency alignment. When your attention locks onto fear, grief, anger, or loss, you are collapsing the waveforms of possibility into their familiar manifestations. Observation is resonance. Observation is creation. Observation is choice, whether conscious or unconscious. And yet the beauty of this is that observation is malleable. Awareness is flexible. The same lens that has collapsed trauma into repeated form can be recalibrated to collapse new possibilities into reality. The observer itself can evolve. This is the liberation hidden within the laws of quantum mechanics. Trauma is not permanent. It is not destiny. It is a frequency, a waveform, a vibration awaiting realignment. The moment awareness illuminates the wound, it begins to lose its grip. The moment the observer shifts, the observation transforms. The field responds in kind. Let's make this tangible. Think of a relationship pattern that has repeated in your life. At first you might have seen it as coincidence or bad luck, a cruel script imposed by fate. But in reality it is a mirror, a reflection of the resonance you carry. The old fear, the old expectation, the neural imprint, is observing itself into being. Each perceived betrayal or abandonment is a confirmation of the frequency you project. When the observer, the consciousness, remains entwined with fear, distrust, or resentment, the universe has no choice but to present more evidence of that vibration. This is not judgment. It is physics. The mirror is impartial. It only knows resonance. Now imagine the shift that occurs when awareness enters the system. You do not need to erase your past. You do not need to rewrite history. You need only observe it without identification. To watch a memory with consciousness rather than with old programming is to change the wavelength of your observer. The observer effect becomes intentional. Trauma loses the power to dictate form. A situation that once repeated in identical pattern now holds new potential. The wave of possibility no longer collapses into the same pain. The field adjusts because the observer has adjusted. Your body is part of this quantum observation. Trauma is encoded not just in thought but in flesh, in muscle tension, in the rhythm of the heart, in the tightening of the gut. The body becomes a resonant instrument, continually broadcasting the frequency of old experiences. Every startle, every micro-reaction, Every flash of anxiety is a note in the symphony of repeated reality. Yet the body is also a gateway. Awareness of bodily sensation, a pause before reaction, a breath before identification. These are the tools that shift the observer. The quantum lens becomes conscious. Neural pathways begin to reorganize. Frequencies recalibrate. The observer, once reactive, becomes responsive. Consider the metaphor of light passing through a prism. Trauma bends perception, splitting reality into distorted hues that color every experience. Through awareness, the prism is realigned. The same light now refracts into clarity. Situations that once triggered fear are now experienced as neutral energy. Pain becomes data. The observer sees the wound without absorbing it, without collapsing the same pattern into form. In this state, the field of infinite possibility becomes accessible again. The observer effect, once unconscious, becomes intentional. Reality bends not because the world changes but because the observer changes. This process is deeply energetic. It is subtle, imperceptible at first, yet profound in effect. Each time you witness your fear without identification, each time you pause before reaction, each time you allow presence to override programming, the vibrational signature of your consciousness shifts. The quantum field, which has mirrored trauma with unwavering fidelity, now mirrors awareness. Old cycles begin to dissolve. Repetition loses its hold. You start to inhabit a new waveform. Not better, not different in superficial ways, fundamentally different, because the frequency of observation determines the structure of reality itself. Even neuroscientists are beginning to understand what mystics have known for centuries. Observation rewires the nervous system. The amygdala, once overactive with fear, begins to quiet. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious awareness, gains strength. Neuroplasticity allows old circuits to be reorganized, not erased, but reframed through observation. Trauma is not erased, but its control diminishes. Your body and mind learn to resonate with awareness instead of reaction. And the field, which always mirrors you, responds in harmony. The paradox is elegant. Trauma repeats only until it is observed. Once fully witnessed, it ceases to dictate form. Patterns that seemed eternal collapse. Relationships, opportunities, and life circumstances begin to emerge in alignment with new resonance. You are no longer trapped in a feedback loop. You are no longer the unconscious observer, replaying familiar pain. You are awake, aware, present, and capable of collapsing infinite potential into realities aligned with your highest frequency. To grasp the full power of this, imagine that every memory, every emotion, every unconscious belief is a particle in the quantum field, vibrating with potential. Each particle is a possibility waiting for observation, a potential version of reality poised to collapse into form. Your trauma, your past experiences, your fears, they are all observers themselves, nested within your consciousness, projecting the same wavelength over and over. The universe does not distinguish between your conscious observation and the unconscious resonance of your wound. Both are equally potent, equally creative. And this is why patterns repeat. Not because the world is cruel, but because your attention is resonating with what has already been. Now consider this. What if awareness could become a super observer, one that transcends old programming entirely? What if the consciousness that observes your reality could be detached from the habitual lens of trauma and expectation? This is not a thought experiment. This is a quantum truth. Observation does not require elimination of the past. It requires elevation of the observer. Once you shift your frequency, the infinite probabilities available in the quantum field realign to match that new resonance. Suddenly, choices appear where there were only repetition. Love, abundance, trust, creativity. These frequencies were always present, always existing in potential. The observer effect merely decides which wave collapses into your experience. Here is where the subtlety lies. Shifting the observer is not an act of willpower. It is not about trying harder, pushing harder, or forcing outcomes. Willpower collapses probability into form based on tension and fear. It often recreates the very loops you are trying to escape. True observer shifting is softer, radical, and entirely quantum in nature. It is the act of allowing awareness to witness the wound, the fear, the old pattern, without collapsing it into habitual form. It is presence without identification. It is the conscious breath that interrupts the old waveform and invites a new one to crystallize. Think of it as tuning a radio. Old trauma frequencies are loud, familiar, and invasive. They drown out subtler stations. Awareness, the quantum tuner, gently turns the dial. The signal of fear quiets. The signal of old pain fades, and in that silence, new frequencies emerge. Possibility, creativity, trust, love, liberation. You do not need to erase the old signal. You need only to shift resonance enough that the universe responds differently. In this space, reality begins to reshape itself around you, not as punishment or reward, but as reflection of the observer now awake. Let's explore another layer. Time, as we perceive it, is itself a quantum illusion. Linear chronology is a construct of the mind. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously in the field of infinite potential. When you observe through the lens of trauma, you are not only collapsing probabilities in the present, you are effectively entangling yourself with the past. Each memory triggers a resonance that reaches backward and forward in time, reinforcing old patterns and attracting analogous experiences. You have experienced déjà vu, repetitive relationships, recurring challenges, not as mere coincidence but as quantum entanglement of consciousness. The observer locks onto a frequency, and the universe mirrors it across temporal dimensions. This is why healing feels like a radical act. Observing a wound consciously is not passive. It rewires time itself. You are disentangling your present from the automatic resonance of the past. You are reprogramming probability to favor alignment instead of repetition. The simple act of witnessing your fear without reacting creates temporal coherence. The past no longer dictates the present, and the present no longer collapses into the same painful future. You are in essence collapsing a new version of reality from the infinite sea of quantum possibility. But how does one sustain this shift? It is not enough to observe a single event or memory and call it healed. Quantum reality is persistent. The resonance of old trauma permeates multiple layers of perception, emotion, thought, body, and energy. Each layer must be witnessed. Each layer must be observed with conscious attention. This is why practices like mindful awareness, journaling, somatic work, and conscious breath are so powerful. They are not arbitrary. They are quantum tuning protocols, methods to recalibrate the observer, layer by layer, frequency by frequency. Imagine a moment of perceived betrayal. The mind immediately interprets it, labels it, and collapses the outcome into familiar emotional pain. The body reacts before thought can intervene. Tension in the chest, tightening of the stomach, shallow breath. Each reaction strengthens the frequency of old trauma, reinforcing the loop. But the moment you pause, notice the physical reaction, the thoughts, the labels, and consciously observe it as a witness. The resonance shifts. You are no longer reacting. You are observing. The field responds. A different outcome emerges. Clarity instead of chaos, choice instead of compulsion, freedom instead of repetition. Now expand this idea beyond the individual. The observer effect is not limited to personal experiences. It scales. The frequency you carry resonates through relationships, communities, and even collective consciousness. Trauma projected unconsciously into the world reverberates, creating collective patterns of fear, distrust, and scarcity. Awareness projected consciously into the world. Presence, compassion, curiosity, and intentional observation resonates outward as well, altering the probabilities of collective reality. You are not just healing yourself. You are healing the field you inhabit. You are shifting the observer at a quantum scale. This is why spiritual teachers and quantum scientists often converge on the same insight. Reality is participatory. It is not a stage upon which you passively exist. It is a dynamic system that responds to the frequency of observation. Every thought, every memory, every act of presence, every breath taken consciously, is an input into the field, a tuning fork, striking the infinite possibilities of existence. Trauma repeats only when the observer remains unconscious. Awareness dissolves repetition. Conscious observation collapses new possibilities. You are both the lens and the light. You are both the field and the observer. And here is the subtle paradox. The observer that can shift reality is already present, always has been. It is not created. It is uncovered. Trauma does not need to be destroyed. Pain does not need to be eliminated. What is required is simple, radical witnessing. To see the wound fully, to see the fear fully, and to know with deep, quantum certainty that observation does not require identification. You are not the wound, you are the consciousness that can observe it. And once this observer awakens, the waveform of reality itself begins to change. Let's consider a practical embodiment. You notice a trigger, irritation, betrayal, loneliness. Without awareness, the loop begins. Thought, emotion, body, reaction. The same waveform of old trauma collapses into form, but now, with quantum consciousness, you intervene. A deep breath, a gentle pause, a shift of attention to the observer. I notice this, you say silently. I see this without becoming it. The waveform pauses, observation shifts, new possibilities open. You may respond differently, speak differently, act differently. The field aligns, the loop fractures, repetition loses its power. The same moment now exists as a doorway rather than a trap. This is the essential quantum paradox of healing. The past does not repeat, because the world is fixed. It repeats because observation is fixed. Consciousness is creative, not reactive. Attention is generative, not passive. Frequency dictates form. And the liberation is immediate, though it unfolds gradually. The moment you awaken the observer, repetition loses its hold. You no longer need to fight the past. You no longer need to plead with life to be different. You simply become conscious of observation itself, and the field responds in kind. Now, let's make this quantum perspective tangible in daily life, where observation meets lived experience. Imagine you encounter someone who triggers an old wound, a colleague, a family member, a partner. Without awareness, the observer is unconscious, and the familiar pattern collapses into form. The familiar arguments, the subtle manipulations, the echoes of rejection. Suddenly, the past is alive in the present. Your body reacts, your mind interprets, and the field mirrors the vibration of fear, defensiveness, or mistrust. The trauma waveform crystallizes. This is the cycle most people call bad luck or repetition. But from a quantum perspective, it is precision, not punishment. Your attention is resonating with the same frequency it always has. Now, introduce the conscious observer. You notice the trigger rising. A micro-reaction begins. A tightening in the chest, a flicker of irritation, a sudden tension in the jaw. Instead of collapsing into the old pattern, you pause, you breathe, you become aware of the resonance itself. Ah, this is the old frequency responding. I see it. Suddenly, Mavriv shifts from identification to witnessing. You are no longer a character in the movie of your past. You are the consciousness watching the movie. The quantum field responds instantly, not because the external situation changed, but because the observer changed. The pattern fractures. The waveform recalibrates. The same moment can now give rise to a different outcome. Consider another example, this time with relationships. Many people unconsciously collapse the same relational patterns into form over and over. Partners who abandon, betray, or emotionally distance themselves. The mind interprets these as fate, karma, or unluckiness. But quantum mechanics reveals a different truth. The observer resonates with a frequency that attracts these experiences. If fear of abandonment is the dominant wavelength, then the field will mirror it, bringing experiences, people, and circumstances that confirm that vibration. And yet, this is not fixed. By cultivating conscious observation, you can shift the resonance. Pause before judgment. Observe your fear without identifying with it. Shift your vibration from fear to presence. Suddenly, relationships that once repeated the same old story now unfold differently. Distance becomes space for growth rather than confirmation of abandonment. Communication becomes clarity rather than conflict. The waveform of experience changes because the observer has changed. Quantum resonance also operates within your body. Trauma is encoded somatically. Tension, shallow breath, clenched muscles, heart palpitations, restless energy. The body is a resonant instrument, broadcasting the frequency of past experience into present reality. Observing the body with awareness shifts this resonance. Imagine noticing your chest tighten in response to fear. Instead of reacting, you place your hand on your heart, breathe deeply, and say silently, I am observing this, not reliving it. The physical frequency softens, the waveform of experience recalibrates. The nervous system previously locked into repetition begins to reorganize. Trauma dissolves, not by force, not by suppression, but by conscious observation. The observer changes, the body responds, and the field mirrors a new resonance. Now let's expand this into a broader consciousness practice. You are not only observing the external triggers of trauma, but also the internal landscapes. Thoughts, judgments, emotional reactions. Every thought you notice, every emotional spike you witness, without identification, is a recalibration of the observer. Imagine the mental chatter as a storm of particles vibrating with old probability patterns. Observation is the calm center in the storm. As you watch the storm without reacting, the particles themselves begin to shift frequency. Old thoughts dissolve into awareness. Emotional waves settle into coherent resonance. Consciousness expands because the observer has expanded. The field, reflecting this observer, begins to mirror new possibilities previously inaccessible. Let's consider abundance as another example. Many people unconsciously collapse scarcity into form because their observer resonates with lack. They may say, "I want wealth," but their unconscious frequency vibrates fear, limitation, or unworthiness. The field responds accordingly, mirroring the vibration of scarcity. By consciously observing this pattern without judgment, you shift resonance. I see this fear. I notice this belief. I observe it, and I am not it. Suddenly the waveform of potential shifts. Opportunities appear that previously went unnoticed. The field mirrors alignment with presence and possibility rather than fear and limitation. Wealth, creativity, and abundance unfold not because of effort alone, but because the observer has recalibrated. Healing trauma with quantum consciousness is not linear. The observer may slip back into old frequencies. Awareness is a practice, a continuous tuning. Each moment of conscious observation strengthens the neural pathways of presence and weakens the circuits of reactivity. Neuroscience confirms this. Mindfulness practices and conscious observation reshape the brain. The amygdala, once overactive with fear, calms. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious decision-making, strengthens. The nervous system, previously reactive, becomes responsive. Quantum mechanics mirrors this change. The observer now collapses new probabilities into form. The loop of trauma loses its hold. Let's explore the energetic principle further. Every thought, memory, and feeling carries a vibrational signature. Trauma emits a low-frequency resonance: fear, anxiety, anger, shame. Conscious observation emits a high-frequency resonance: presence, clarity, acceptance. The universe does not differentiate between the content of thought and the frequency it carries. Resonance dictates collapse. When your observation is tethered to trauma, the field mirrors the same. When your observation shifts into awareness, love, or curiosity, the field mirrors a different waveform. This is the alchemy of the quantum observer. Reality does not change because the world is fixed. Reality changes because your consciousness has evolved. Here is a practical embodiment for daily life. The reobservation protocol. First, notice a recurring pattern, something that is repeated like clockwork in your life. It could be relational, emotional, or situational. Second, observe it fully. Name the pattern silently. This is abandonment. This is betrayal. This is shame. Third, observe the bodily response: tension, heart rate, breath. Fourth, pause, breathe, and say internally, "I am observing this. I see it, but I am not it." Fifth, imagine a new waveform emerging. New possibilities, new outcomes, new resonance. This is not fantasy. This is conscious observation collapsing new probability into form. The more you practice, the stronger the observer becomes. Trauma dissolves. Repetition ceases. The field responds with precision. Quantum consciousness also invites us to expand beyond personal experience. Collective trauma operates on the same principles: societal fear, ancestral wounds, collective scarcity. These are frequencies entangled within the broader field of consciousness. Observation at the individual level can ripple outward. By cultivating awareness, presence, and coherence, you not only shift your personal reality but also influence the resonance of the collective field. You become a node of conscious observation, a beacon altering probabilities on multiple levels. Healing is no longer private. It is cosmic. Now, let's dive deeper into consciousness expansion. The observer itself can be expanded beyond the body. the mind, and even time. In meditation or quantum awareness practices, consciousness can become the pure witness, untethered from habitual identification, observing thought as thought, emotion as emotion, events as events, without collapse into old patterns, is the essence of observer expansion. In this state, the infinite probabilities of reality become accessible. Old trauma loses grip because the observer is no longer bound by its resonant presence. Love and possibility become the dominant frequencies. The universe mirrors this shift. New realities crystallize effortlessly. Even subtle shifts in attention create profound effects. Imagine walking through your day noticing micro-reactions, irritation at a comment, impatience in traffic, subtle judgments about others. Each is an opportunity to observe rather than react. Each observation shifts resonance. Each pause is a recalibration of the quantum observer. Over time, what was once reactive becomes responsive. What was once repetitive becomes innovative. What was once trauma-driven becomes awareness-driven. Every interaction, every moment, every breath becomes a laboratory for quantum creation. Here is the quantum principle of liberation. You are never bound by the past. Not because it disappears, but because observation determines collapse. Your past exists as a probability waveform in the field, a frequency that only manifests when observed unconsciously. Consciously observing the past, with presence and awareness, transforms its influence. It no longer dictates form. It becomes data, energy, and information, rather than a deterministic script. Repetition loses authority. Freedom emerges naturally. The observer effect, once unconscious, becomes the instrument of liberation. Practical embodiment continues with daily consciousness exercises. 1. Journaling with observation. Write a memory as if you are the observer, not the participant. Notice emotions, sensations, and thoughts, but do not identify. Somatic awareness practice. Pause throughout the day, observe bodily reactions, and breathe into tension, saying silently, I am observing this, not reliving it. 3. Micro-presence. Notice small triggers, judgments, and reactive thoughts as they arise. Observe without identification. 4. Visualization of new waveforms. Intentionally imagine possibilities unfolding that were previously inaccessible. These are not wishes. They are energetic invitations for the field to respond to your evolved observation. Through these practices, the observer shifts from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. Trauma, once dominant, becomes a teacher rather than a tyrant. Fear transforms into guidance. Patterns that once dictated life now inform awareness. Every moment becomes a laboratory for the quantum alchemy of consciousness. Repetition loses power. Liberation emerges, and the observer resonates at higher frequencies, inviting the field to collapse into realities aligned with presence, clarity, and love. Now we enter the territory of advanced observer mastery, where observation transforms from mere witnessing to energetic alchemy. At this stage, you begin to see not only how trauma shapes your reality, but also how every vibration within you acts as a signal to the quantum field. The observer effect is no longer reactive. It becomes intentional, refined, and precise. Every thought, every emotion, every breath becomes an instrument of resonance. You begin to understand that consciousness is not a spectator in life, but a conductor of the infinite orchestra of probability. One of the first advanced techniques is what I call observer layering. Start by noticing the multiple layers of observation active at any given moment. There is the conscious observer, the part of you that thinks, breathes, and perceives. There is the subconscious observer, the neural patterns, the conditioned mind, the trauma frequency that scans for threat and repeats old loops. And there is the subtle observer, the energetic essence that perceives potential, vibrational resonance, and the waveforms of possibility before they crystallize. Mastery arises when these layers are recognized, acknowledged, and harmonized. The conscious observer can then act as a director, allowing the subconscious and subtle observers to resonate at a higher frequency, dissolving repetition and inviting coherent manifestation. To practice observer layering, begin with a moment of recognition. Notice a trigger. Observe the immediate emotional and bodily reaction. This is the subconscious observer. Then step back and note the thought patterns and interpretations. The conscious observer. Finally, shift attention to the subtle resonance underlying the entire experience. The vibration of fear, desire, or resistance itself. Witness this frequency without judgment. Allow all three layers to coexist in observation, harmonizing rather than clashing. In this state, you are no longer collapsing old patterns unconsciously. You are collapsing probabilities with awareness, creating coherence across all layers of consciousness. Another cornerstone of vibrational mastery is inner alchemy, the practice of transmuting emotional energy into conscious power. Trauma, pain, and fear are forms of energy that are not inherently destructive. They are raw vibrational matter, waiting to be observed and transformed. Inner alchemy begins when you stop resisting or repressing this energy and instead allow it to be fully witnessed. For example, when anger rises, notice it in your body. Observe its waveforms in thought and emotion. Breathe into it. Then imagine the energy softening, expanding, and integrating into your consciousness as power, clarity, and insight. Each act of observation transmutes trauma into mastery. The observer effect is no longer simply reflective. It becomes generative. The field responds to your new vibrational signature, collapsing realities aligned with empowerment rather than repetition. Vibrational mastery also requires understanding resonance alignment. Every thought, belief, and feeling vibrates at a frequency. Trauma, fear, and unresolved pain resonate at lower frequencies, attracting experiences that match. Love, trust, presence, and awareness resonate at higher frequencies, drawing new realities into form. To practice resonance alignment, begin with micro-moments of observation throughout your day. Notice when your energy dips into familiar loops of fear or judgment. Pause, breathe, observe, shift attention to a higher vibration. Gratitude, curiosity, acceptance, love. Feel the frequency ripple through your body, mind, and subtle energy field. The universe mirrors this realignment, reorganizing probabilities to reflect the observer's elevated state. Over time, repetition loses its grip entirely. Now consider the concept of temporal liberation, a critical step in freeing yourself from past loops. Trauma often binds consciousness to specific points in time, creating entanglement that reaches backward and forward, collapsing old probabilities again and again. By observing the past without identification, you disentangle from these timelines. You realize that past events exist as probability waveforms in the field, not as immutable realities. You are free to collapse new outcomes from the infinite sea of potential. Advanced temporal liberation practices involve consciously recalling past experiences while remaining anchored in present observation. Witness the memory, observe the resonance, and consciously release attachment to its influence. This recalibrates the observer across time itself, fracturing the loop and expanding access to new possibilities. Another advanced practice is frequency doubling, where you intentionally amplify the vibration of awareness over trauma. Begin by noticing a familiar trigger, perhaps fear, resentment, or doubt. Observe it fully, without reaction. Then, intentionally overlay a higher frequency: love, compassion, curiosity, or presence. Imagine this higher frequency doubling the vibration of the original experience. The field responds to the new resonance, not the old. Situations that once repeated now unfold differently. This technique works because energy in the quantum field seeks coherence. When you double the frequency, you tip the resonance toward expansion and liberation. Let's examine pattern dissolution through quantum observation. Most trauma repeats because it exists as a persistent waveform in the subconscious observer. By observing it consciously, you interrupt the automatic collapse into form. Start with a recurring emotional or relational pattern. Trace it back to its earliest imprint in memory. Observe the physical sensations, the thoughts, the emotional charges, and the subtle energy it emits. Witness the pattern as if it were external to you. Like observing a particle wave in a laboratory, you are the experimenter, and the energy is the subject. Maintain observation without identification. The pattern begins to dissolve, its frequency no longer capable of automatically collapsing the same outcome. The observer has evolved, and the field responds. Energetic integration is another advanced layer. Once patterns dissolve, the previously reactive energy must be integrated into conscious resonance. Integration involves feeling fully, observing fully, and allowing the energy to merge with your higher frequency. For example, if shame arises, observe it completely. Breathe. Visualize it transforming into self-compassion and clarity. Feel it permeate your body, mind, and subtle energy system. This integration consolidates the observer's mastery and ensures the waveform of trauma does not remanifest. The quantum field mirrors this integration with coherence. reinforcing liberation and new probability pathways. Now let's take this further with waveform expansion practices. Once the observer is advanced, you can intentionally expand consciousness into higher dimensions of perception. Imagine reality as an ocean of waves, each wave representing a probability, each frequency a potential outcome. Traditionally, old trauma collapses low-frequency waves into form. With an advanced observer, you can shift to higher frequency waves, waves of love, presence, abundance, and creativity. Through breath, visualization, and sustained awareness, the observer extends into these higher waves, collapsing new realities that were previously inaccessible. This is not imagination. This is resonance mastery, where the quantum field responds to your expanded observation. A critical insight emerges here. Liberation is simultaneous, internal and external. The observer does not need to control the external world. Instead, by mastering internal resonance, you collapse external realities aligned with your evolved state. Relationships, circumstances, opportunities, and experiences all reorganize around the observer's frequency. The field does not resist, it mirrors precisely. Trauma repeats only when internal observation remains unconscious. Liberation occurs when observation becomes conscious, expansive, and coherent. Every act of witnessing is a creative collapse of potential. Every breath of awareness is a recalibration of reality. Consider the practice of observer coherence in relationships. Most relational pain repeats because the observer in one or both participants is locked in trauma frequency. By cultivating awareness and coherence, you shift your resonance, which in turn affects relational waveforms. Observe your own emotional responses before engaging. Notice habitual projections. Breathe into the body. Align with presence rather than reactivity. This creates coherence, and the field responds, often transforming relational dynamics effortlessly. Patterns that once repeated begin to dissolve. Misunderstandings resolve naturally. Trust and openness emerge, not by force but by resonance alignment. Finally, the culmination of advanced observer mastery is full liberation from past loops. At this level, you recognize that the observer itself is eternal, unbound by any specific experience. Trauma is not erased but observed fully, integrated and transformed into conscious resonance. The quantum field mirrors this mastery, presenting new realities that reflect presence, coherence, and vibrational alignment. Repetition ceases because the observer no longer resonates with the old frequency. Awareness becomes your natural state. Life unfolds as a dance of infinite potential, with the observer consciously participating in creation rather than re-experiencing the past. To embody full liberation, practice these steps daily. Observe without identification. Witness triggers, memories, and emotions without collapsing them into habitual outcomes. Layer awareness. Integrate subconscious, conscious, and subtle observers into coherent observation. Transmute energy. Transform trauma, fear, and pain into conscious power and clarity. Align resonance. Shift attention to higher frequencies: love, presence, curiosity, and gratitude. Expand waveforms. Extend consciousness into higher frequency possibilities in the quantum field. Integrate fully. Allow dissolved patterns to merge with your evolved awareness, consolidating mastery. Observe relationships coherently. Apply observer mastery in interactions, transforming relational dynamics through resonance. Practice temporal liberation. Disentangle past, present, and future probabilities, collapsing reality from conscious observation. Through these practices, liberation becomes inevitable. The observer evolves. The field responds. Trauma no longer dictates your reality. Repetition ceases. Infinite possibilities open. You are no longer the character in the loop of your past. You are the conscious architect of new forms. In this advanced state, consciousness becomes both the lens and the light. You observe with clarity, breathe with presence, resonate with power, and collapse probabilities with intention. The past may exist, but it no longer has authority. Every interaction, every thought, every emotional wave is an opportunity for conscious creation. You are a quantum master of your own reality. Trauma is a teacher, not a tyrant. Fear is information, not destiny. Repetition is a waveform to be observed, not a trap. Liberation is the natural consequence of evolved observation. Now, as we approach the culmination of this journey, it's time to integrate everything we've explored into living reality. You have seen how trauma is not a curse but a frequency, how repetition is not punishment but the mirror of unconscious observation, and how your consciousness, the observer, holds the ultimate power to collapse infinite probabilities into reality. The final stage is not about knowing intellectually but embodying fully. It's about living as the conscious observer in every breath, every interaction, every heartbeat. The first principle of final integration is presence as mastery. Presence is not a technique, it is your natural quantum state. To live in presence is to observe without being consumed, to notice without collapsing old patterns, to resonate without resistance. In presence, the observer and the observed align harmoniously. Reality no longer repeats old trauma because your consciousness resonates at a frequency that transcends the patterns of the past. Every micro-moment becomes a laboratory for creation, a space where infinite potential can crystallize into form in alignment with your highest self. The second principle is conscious resonance. Your body, mind, and subtle energy are instruments of vibration. Every thought, every feeling, every action emits a signal into the quantum field. Trauma, fear, and old patterns vibrate at lower frequencies. Presence, love, and awareness vibrate higher. When you consistently observe yourself and your life from the higher resonance, the field responds with perfect fidelity. Relationships shift, opportunities emerge, and circumstances realign with your conscious frequency. The world reflects the observer's vibration with precision. You are no longer responding to life. You are co-creating it. Next is radical observer embodiment. By now you understand that liberation does not come from eliminating pain, but from evolving the observer. The observer is not a part of your mind. It is the core of consciousness itself. When fully embodied, the observer transcends identification with any single experience, thought, or emotion. Trauma no longer defines your lens. Fear no longer dictates your actions. Patterns of the past dissolve naturally because the observer no longer resonates with. Every experience becomes an opportunity to witness, to align, and to collapse new probabilities consciously. You are no longer caught in loops. You are free to orchestrate life from awareness. A powerful practice to solidify this state is observer daily integration. Each day set aside micro-moments to anchor your consciousness. Begin with breath. Notice the rise and fall of your body, the vibration of life within you. Observe thoughts as they arise without labeling them or becoming them. Observe emotions as energy, flowing through your body like waves. Notice sensations, impulses, and subtle shifts. When you encounter triggers, pause, breathe, and remember. You are the observer, not the pattern. Over time, this daily attunement recalibrates your nervous system, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, and aligns your subtle energy field with higher frequencies. The field responds by reorganizing the probabilities of your life around conscious awareness rather than unconscious repetition. Another advanced integration is quantum wave alignment. Visualize reality as a vast ocean of infinite waves, every possibility coexisting simultaneously. The observer selects which wave collapses into experience. Trauma and old patterns collapse low-frequency waves. Awareness and presence collapse high-frequency waves. Through intention, observation, and presence, align with higher wave possibilities. See your life as an ever-unfolding quantum field, responsive to your resonance. Every choice, every moment of conscious observation, guides which waveform crystallizes. Liberation is not theoretical. It is practical, observable, and available in every moment. Now consider unified observer consciousness, where individual mastery meets universal resonance. The observer does not exist in isolation. Your frequency interacts with other observers, shaping shared realities. When you cultivate presence, coherence, and high-frequency observation, you influence collective fields. Trauma echoes in collective resonance until conscious observation dissolves it. By expanding your observer consciousness, you contribute not only to your own liberation, but to the elevation of relational, societal, and even ancestral fields. Healing becomes an act of quantum co-creation. Presence is no longer personal, it is cosmic. Finally, embrace freedom as natural consequence. The past does not control you. Trauma does not dictate outcomes. Repetition loses its authority because the observer has shifted, evolved, and expanded. Life unfolds as a mirror of your conscious frequency. Opportunities, relationships, and experiences are no longer constrained by old probabilities but collapse in alignment with presence, coherence, and vibrational mastery. You are no longer subject to circumstance. You are a participant in the creative dance of reality itself. Liberation is not a destination, it is your quantum nature revealed. To embody this fully, cultivate a quantum daily practice. Morning resonance check. Begin each day with breath, presence, and intention. Observe the mind, the body, and the subtle field. Set a conscious frequency for the day. Micro moments of observation. Throughout the day, pause to notice triggers, judgments, and emotional responses. Observe them as energy, not as identity. Shift to higher resonance. Evening reobservation. Reflect on the day's experiences. Notice patterns without judgment. Integrate energy from old reactions into conscious awareness. Collapse new probabilities for tomorrow. Waveform visualization. Intentionally align with possibilities of growth, love, creativity, and freedom. Imagine reality responding to your conscious observer. Gratitude and expansion. End the day resonating in appreciation for the field's responsiveness, reinforcing alignment with presence rather than repetition. Through consistent practice, the observer becomes natural, effortless, and coherent. Trauma no longer repeats because the observer has evolved. Life becomes a mirror of conscious mastery. Every moment is a choice. Every breath a calibration. Every interaction an opportunity to collapse new reality. Let's close with a final meditation for full integration. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Notice the body, the mind, and the subtle energy within. Recall a moment that once triggered old pain. Observe it fully, without reaction. Now expand your awareness. Notice the observer watching the pain. Feel the resonance of presence and coherence spreading through every cell, every thought, every energy wave. With each breath, let old patterns dissolve into observation. Allow higher frequency possibilities. Love, freedom, clarity, presence to collapse into form. Visualize your life unfolding effortlessly. Liberated from old loops. Feel the field respond. Observe the mirror of reality reflecting the evolved observer. Remain in this state as long as you need. Know that liberation is already within you. The observer is awake. The waveform has shifted. Freedom is. The ultimate truth is simple yet profound. Your past repeats only because your observation has remained unconscious. Your trauma is not punishment. It is a mirror. Your frequency is not fixed. It is creative. The quantum field is not random. It is responsive. The observer is the key. When observation awakens, patterns dissolve, repetition ceases, and life flows in alignment with presence, coherence, and vibrational mastery. So as you step forward, carry this with you. Every breath, every thought, every feeling, every action is an opportunity to collapse a new reality. Trauma is energy to be witnessed, transmuted, and integrated. Fear is information to be observed, not obeyed. Presence is your natural state. Observation is your superpower. The field is your canvas, and the infinite possibilities of your life await, collapsing in alignment with the observer you choose to be. You are no longer bound. You are the conscious observer. You are the wave collapser of infinite potential. You are free.